The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Welcome to Squawk Box Europe. I'm Karen Cho with Ben Boulos and Steve Sedgwick live from Ankara, Turkey at the NATO summit. These are your headlines. NATO leaders gathering in the Turkish capital with a focus once again on America's commitment, with allies rushing to boost defence spending. Secretary General Marc Rutte insists there is unity.
It is, I think, bringing NATO closer together, and having a review regularly, I think, is only wise. And the way it will be organized, with the Supreme Allied Commander being center stage in the review, the fact that the Americans have declared very clearly that they will do this in close coordination with all allies.
Well, here in Ankara, the US permanent representative to NATO, the so-called ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, says to me that the US does want the alliance to succeed, but stresses this can only happen if allies pay their fair share.
The United States wants strong, capable allies, and that's all we're asking. And so, President Trump's going to show up, I think, with a very clear message that we agreed to 5%, the United States is leading from the front, and we expect our allies to keep pace.
Limit down. Sky-high preliminary earnings at Samsung seem to spook the markets, triggering a circuit breaker on the KOSPI as investors rush to take money off the table. And in a match overshadowed by controversy off the field, Belgium defeat World Cup hosts United States by 4-1, teeing up a showdown with Spain in the quarterfinals.
A NATO summit is set to kick off in Ankara today, with defence spending targets under unprecedented scrutiny from the White House. The alliance will face a test of its credibility this week after countries committed to spending 5% of GDP on defence by 2035, with the debate now moving from pledges to implementation. At the press conference ahead of the summit, Steve pressed the NATO Secretary General Marc Rutte on whether the US was dividing the alliance.
I admire your optimism, which has followed through since the groundbreaking achievements in The Hague. But if we were in such a good place, why would Pete Hegseth be accusing allies of freeloading, of free riding, having a review which is holding the sword of Damocles over you and NATO about which parties will pass, which will fail? You talked about the European money which is being spent, and yet he's dividing nations, saying you get support, you won't get support if you don't spend enough as well. The US is splitting NATO, isn't it, rather than bringing it together?
It is not. It is, I think, bringing NATO closer together, and having a review regularly, I think, is only wise. And the way it will be organized, with the Supreme Allied Commander being center stage in the review, the fact that the Americans have declared very clearly that they will do this in close coordination with all allies, I think is absolutely important. And as we have seen previously with the NATO force model, of course, these adjustments are different from the review. These are different tracks and different processes, but also there they have done this in close coordination and consultation. So no worries there.
And let's get to Steve more. Steve, it was fascinating to hear your question there around the strength of the alliance, because it feels like it's firmly in focus. The commitments have come through. Europe gets the message now, as it has a conflict still on its eastern flank. It sees the conflict in the Middle East. But what about how that money is spent, whether the money is concentrated in bolstering European productivity, European growth?
I think that's an incredibly valid question, Karen, and it's a question that is going to be raised a few hundred metres from the complex I'm in now, which I'm at, by the way, I'm at the National Library complex next to the National Palace behind. I mean, it is an extraordinary sequencing of events on this Ankara NATO summit, because today, for the first time, rather than me standing there ramming my microphone into the world leaders' faces as they arrive, they're actually going to do the arrivals tomorrow on the second day, because the first day is going to be absolutely dominated by that very thematic, Karen, the Defence Industry Forum. This is the first time you've had the industry plus allies plus NATO all in one room saying, okay, we've made the commitment in The Hague, and that was groundbreaking. As I said to the Sec Gen yesterday, it was absolutely groundbreaking to go from 2% commitment to a 5% commitment. And as you well know, everyone apart from Mr. Sanchez was signed up from that, 31 out of 32, was quite extraordinary. But now it's got to be about how it's done and proving to the Americans, more importantly, that it is being done, because something extraordinary has happened. The Sec Gen said to me yesterday, it's being done, the US withdrawal of assets is being done in coordination and consultation with NATO allies. I have enormous respect for Marc Rutte, a man who I've been interviewing in various guises for the best part of 20 years, and yet I disagree with him, if I may, on this one as well. I think the US is dictating terms of which they pull out assets, and the Europeans are having to run round and fill in the gaps, some form of whack-a-mole for Marc Rutte and his European allies, because time after time, the Americans are wrong-footing Europe on this one. The 5,000 troop reduction from Germany, I don't think that was flagged incredibly well in advance. The fact that the NATO force model, the so-called NFM, which is almost the rapid reaction, how many facilities and assets and troops and missiles and planes are available from the US towards NATO, if indeed there is an immediate crisis as well. They've pulled back on that, taken away an aircraft carrier, taken away jets, taken away some troops, taken away some missile capability as well. And now we've got this peak Hegseth review, 6-month review on which allies are up to muster, which allies are spending enough, and if they're not, then maybe is there going to be a 2-tier NATO where the first tier get US support and the second tier don't? And what does that mean for Article 5? All these questions I put towards the US NATO ambassador Matthew Whitaker yesterday when I said to him, look, the US isn't doing this in coordination with its allies and looks like it's looking for more confrontation with its allies rather than working with them. No doubt you will understand that he disagreed with me, but let's listen in.
I really see the first year of a very successful project. You know, we agreed to 5%. That was a stretch for many of our allies. The United States is going to be there by next year. We have several allies, Poland, the Baltic countries, Denmark, that are very serious and clear-eyed about the threats and how to address those threats. And so, I mean, I see these as growing pains. I see these as just the challenges that we've worked through before. The security environment is obviously very difficult globally. The United States wants strong, capable allies, and that's all we're asking. And so, you know, President Trump's going to show up, I think, with a very clear message that we agreed to 5%, the United States is leading from the front, and we expect our allies to keep pace. Now, again, it's a little bit asymmetrical because there are allies that are right there with us, but we have some that are laggers, and we need to make sure that they commit to the growth over the next 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we have Germany, obviously, that's very clear-eyed, and they're going to be there in 4 years.
Sure, and as Marc Rutte has been at pains to suggest, there is a vast amount more spending going on, somewhere between $90 and $139 billion, depending on how you look at it. And yet we're hearing changes to the US commitment on the NATO force model, changes potentially coming in this 6-month review from the Pentagon as well. The president talking about pay to play as well. The language from your government, sir, seems quite aggressive, even though you're talking about growing pains.
Well, listen, the target is that Europe takes over the conventional defense of the European continent. And so what would you expect? If they take it over, you would expect the U.S. to do less. We're not going away. We're just doing less because we have global requirements and global challenges. So I think that what you're seeing is just a conversation. And, you know, on the force model, our allies stepped up. They were holding back certain assets and certain capabilities that they're now offering, and they've filled most of those gaps. We'll hear that tomorrow. And, I think this is just the natural progression of how this is going to be. There's no reason to panic. There is an urgency that I think our allies, especially the closer they are to the eastern flank, are addressing. But, there's going to be, an ongoing conversation about these things, but I think we're handling them pretty well.
That was Matthew Whitaker, the NATO ambassador of the United States, talking to me yesterday. Look, there are so many nuances and subplots here, not least the fact that 2 things have happened since The Hague as well. One, the US has made pretty assertive moves to try and gain control of Greenland, at one point talking militarily, and that's blindsided a lot of allies. The Danish were going, what? And having to work out how potentially defend Greenland against a NATO ally. The second thing is on the other foot, is where the US US feels it has been betrayed and not supported over Iran, over Epic Fury, when access to some bases for offensive capabilities were denied to the Americans. So the Europeans feel aggrieved about Greenland. The Americans feel aggrieved about Iran as well. So real questions now about what Trump is going to come with, what annoyance he's going to come with, because he is still really annoyed with NATO for many reasons. But one thing I'm at pains to add, Karen, and I think you were on set with me back in 2018 when I thought it was a jaw-dropping moment when President Trump had a breakfast meeting live from Brussels with Jens Stoltenberg on the other side and Mr. Pompeo next to the US president, where he absolutely, and correctly by the way, tore a strip off Europe and especially Frau Merkel and Germany for saying, hang on a second, let me get this right. You want to get all your oil and gas from the Russians, you want to get the cheap gas from the Russians, and yet you want us to pay for your defence against the Russians. This is untenable. And the president was right. It was exactly, Karen, almost to the day, 8 years ago. And of course, no one can say the Europeans haven't been warned.
Remember that moment, Steve. It is bookmarked in my mind. It's fascinating that Trump has had to sell the message of greater defence to Europe. But the messages at home, I think, are interesting because as the Americans got involved in this war in Iran, a lot of Americans were saying, look, it's so far from our shores, it doesn't matter. But what we've learned in the last number of months is that distance is no guarantee of safety, given the precision missiles that are used using autonomous style weapons, but also with artificial intelligence now baked into the capabilities. It means distance doesn't guarantee that safety. What does that mean in terms of how NATO needs to think about the next layer of defence for these nations across those Gulf states to across parts of Europe and even in the United States?
Yeah, look, I think there's, again, another interesting subplot in this story as well. Can I give another angle on my answer to that question and talk about Ukraine, because Mr. Zelensky will be coming here. He'll be at the dinner with the NATO members. He'll be having a bilat, we think, with the president as well. And the nature of warfare in Ukraine and the war between the US and Israel and Iran has changed, I would suggest, everything. Very often a phrase in history, which a lot of our viewers will know, is the generals are fighting the previous war, asking for the flashy equipment, asking for the aircraft carriers, asking for the MBTs, the main battle tanks, when actually what they need to be looking is the current war and the next war, which is, as you say, it's going to be a lot more technologically driven. It's going to be a lot more about drone warfare. And the Ukrainians have done something quite extraordinary. And a lot of NATO members here have been alluding to it as well, which is they've actually managed to not only shore up the battlefield, but take the war to the Russians. Now, whether that's isolating Crimea, whether it's isolating supply chains in that key critical corridor behind the front law in the Donbass and everywhere, or taking the war to Ukraine, to Russians, ordinary Russians, whether it be Moscow, whether it be 2,500 kilometers away, hitting far off refineries as well. So drone warfare has changed absolutely everything. Well, almost everything, and that's the point as well. The Ukrainians are desperate for traditional defences against ballistic missiles, whether it be Patriots, whether it be French systems, and so that will be a big conference conversation at the Defence Industry Forum as well. Can the Europeans and can the Ukrainians have that technology? Can there be a technological transfer and that innovation being built into homegrown manufacturing in Europe and Ukraine as well? So two levels. One, you're absolutely right. Battlefield has changed because of drone capabilities, but they still need good old-fashioned anti-ballistic capabilities, and that's where some of the gaps are as well. So yeah, all these issues to be discussed.
Steve, terrific coverage, and we're looking forward to the rest of it as the day kicks on as well. Thank you so much. Let's push on to some of the big tech news, and we've been very much waiting for the devil in the detail from Samsung. We set it out yesterday, the latest around the profitability metrics here. Samsung Electronics has flagged its third straight quarterly profit, expecting to post a better than expected 19-fold surge in second quarter operating profit. But the shares have fallen sharply. So this is again that storytelling where you have better news, but the market still sells off because those nerves have not been silenced around the capex intensity and whether there is truly problems in terms of the build out. So that caution and the sensitivity remains there. So we're down more than 7% in the trading session, impacting the broader KOSPI. The South Korean rival to the chipmaker SK Hynix yesterday launched its US listing on the NASDAQ to raise more than $28 billion. The deal drew indications of interest for up to $7 billion from major investors as the firm rides the AI wave. That stock also down heavily today, impacting the market across in South Korea, Ben?
Well, let's see the effects that's having on the wider equity markets. And as you can see, they've all been pulled lower despite those record quarterly profits, which you would have thought would have provoked some optimism and some buoyancy in the stock prices. But it still hasn't managed to keep markets above the flat line. Particularly, look at that, the KOSPI giving up around 6% at the moment. The Nikkei 225 off by more than 2%, and the Chinese markets also trading lower this morning. Let's turn our attention to Europe, and this is what the futures are indicating. A bit of a mixed picture, really just picking up the baton from yesterday, where we saw a somewhat mixed close. The Stock 600 closing about 1/3% lower. The FTSE 100 and the CAC 40 both closing the Monday session in negative territory. The DAX in Germany and the MIB in Italy both closing higher. So that lack of direction really filtering through to the Tuesday session. We are counting down to the market open 45 minutes from now. As always, we'll bring you that as it happens here on Squawk Box Europe. Also, still to come on the show, Ukraine hits Russia's largest refinery in Omsk in one of the country's longest range attacks of the war so far. Plus, is Le Pen mightier than the court? The French far-right leader's political future hangs in the balance ahead of a crucial ruling today. And as Nasdaq futures descend deeper into the red, we'll get the latest market picture with BlackRock Fundamental Equities' Helen Jewell. That's all to come. Don't go away.
Executive Decisions is the new podcast from CNBC, where I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything. I'm Steve Sedgwick. Here's Miss Jo Malone, CBE.
I started that first business of skincare. That's when I knew that I was in charge of my own life. And that's when the entrepreneur really, although I didn't know what the word entrepreneur meant, that's when the entrepreneur really took hold.
That's Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. Get it wherever you're listening to this.
Welcome back. Shell has flagged a weaker second quarter integrated gas production outlook, down around 1/3 on the last quarter amid the impact from the Iran war. The energy giant also said its segment tax charge could come in more than $1 billion higher than in the first quarter.
Iran's military has reportedly fired at least 2 missiles at commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz overnight, putting further pressure on the Memorandum of Understanding with the US. That is according to Axios, citing 2 US officials. The UK MTO said a vessel reportedly being struck by an unknown projectile was occurring off the coast of Oman, and authorities are investigating. Iranian state television reported an LNG tanker had been attacked in the area after ignoring warnings. Well, Amos Hochstein joins us, former White House senior advisor and managing partner at TWG Global. Amos, thank you so much for joining us today. As we weigh up where we sit in the Middle East conflict and the NATO summit kicking off today, just come in on the conversation points here, because it feels as though the market investors are hoping we now have this peace or tenuous peace that morphs into something more permanent. What's your view on where we sit today?
Hi, Karen. It's good to be with you. Look, one thing I think we should say off the bat, this is not peace, and we should stop using that term in general. This is a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire in a war. And it's not only a ceasefire in the current war that started in late February. We have been in a long, multi-decade conflict between the United States, the West, and most of the world, and Iran. And we are now in a ceasefire, so we're not in peace. And even that ceasefire, it's not really an agreement, it's an MOU, which was a 1-pager or 1.5 pages of a framework of how to get to a potential ceasefire that is lasting. And I think one of the things that we know has been a challenge is the views of both sides as to how the Strait of Hormuz is controlled or not controlled. The US believes that it needs to go back to some kind of freedom of navigation, but Iran has no intention of returning to the status quo before the war of a totally free Strait of Hormuz. They want to control it. And so the attacks last night are another indication that they believe that this MOU is not a real ceasefire, it is just a temporary halt, and that they still control the Strait of Hormuz.
Just contextualize that in terms of the reports that we've been hearing. I mean, the reports suggest missiles launched at commercial vessels. We've heard similar reports in other previous days as well. What do you think the rationale is here, and what's under attack?
Well, what's under attack is who gets to control the lanes, the sea lanes in the strait. And the friction that we're seeing is that the MOU doesn't exactly say what the future holds, and how to interpret that MOU is up to the parties. It does suggest in the MOU itself that Iran and Oman will have some way of controlling it in collaboration or cooperation with other countries. Iran takes a view that it is fully under their control until a full ceasefire is negotiated. So these firings are really a signal by Iran to the United States and to the mediators that they mean business. Don't be fooled by the cessation of hostilities, that we have given up on our interests, and they're maximizing their position in those negotiations by saying any give on the nuclear program will have to be met by a stringent position on the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of their biggest cards.
Amos, it's Steve Sedgwick here joining from the NATO summit in Ankara. And what I'm fascinated to know about, and use your expertise to explore, is the fragility of alliances. Not only, of course, how the US sees NATO, but how it sees its relationship with the GCC countries and how they see their relationship with the US now. We know the deal historically about the US protection in return for the free flow of resources, but are countries such as Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia now reevaluating the worth of that relationship with the US when it has cost them so dearly economically?
I think it's a great question, but here's where I think we are. On NATO, the issue that, as I think you've been reporting today, the U.S. coming in with a very heavy hand on the review and forcing the NATO Secretary General to be an employee of the United States and doing some kind of review. On the fundamentals on NATO, look, I worked for President Biden. I went to the NATO summits. President Biden used to chide the Europeans on the same issue, that there was not enough burden sharing, as he would refer to it. And he was prodding, and compared between 2021 and 2024, many countries reached the 2%, and Trump is now pushing that even further. The difference is it came from a position of alliance, while now it's who's my friend and who is not, and what are the sanctions for it. So a very different approach in style, but not in the essence of the United States being frustrated for many years by lack of spending in Europe. When it comes to the GCC, look, I think that much of the GCC did not want this war. Once it started, they supported the U.S. campaign because they were also being attacked by the Iranians in the early days of the war, and so that drew them in. I think they were as disappointed with how the war ended as how it started. I think, though, that when it comes to what's the future cooperation in the United States, look, at the end of the day, the UAE is one of the largest and fastest investors in artificial intelligence, in all kinds of compute, in quantum computing, in chips manufacturing, and the U.S. is a natural partner. I spent years working with the UAE on establishing this alliance, and so they're not throwing that away. They're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They want to have a strong relationship with the United States, even if there's a tactical difference of opinion here. When it comes to Qatar, look, politically, they're one of the biggest winners here. They were asked by the United States to be a mediator, and they have proven their value as a mediator. I don't necessarily know that Qatar agrees with everything that is being agreed to in this mediation process. They have their own views, but they have proven that they are a reliable source to go to as a mediator in difficult situations, whether it was Venezuela a few years ago and now in the Iran context. So I think the GCC will look to diversify its relationships around the world. It's going to look to diversify its weapons programs and purchasing and defense cooperation because they're not 100% sure how much they can rely on the United States to fight wars to the end or to not enter wars when they shouldn't. And so I think we're in such a volatility of the U.S. behavior. And we also have, of course, the volatility that they're watching in Israel with the next election, which will be very determinative of the direction of travel in Israel, which affects them as well. So I think we're in a point in both NATO and the GCC, of trying to understand what the relation with the United States could look like in this moment. But everybody knows they have to diversify and reduce their reliance on the United States, both diplomatically, politically, and militarily.
Indeed. And can I draw upon your expertise on what this might do to the US psychology towards military adventurism? Of course, it is oft-stated, and we all know, that the president came in partly on a ticket of no more unneeded foreign adventurism. And of course, since then, we've had Venezuela, we've had threats to Greenland, and now, of course, people looking towards what Marco Rubio and others want to do in Cuba as well. Do you think this has dented some of the ardor amongst some of the foreign policy hawks for more US aggression on an international stage? Or actually, is it now going to draw back the US because of what has been a sobering lesson in the conflict with Iran?
I think it's the latter. I think the sobering lesson is pretty big, not only because what was seen as, the recency bias that led us into this war, which were two major recency biases. One was Venezuela was supposed to be hard, but it was, look at us, it was easy, we did it, it went well, and the outcome was good, and it didn't take any time except for a Saturday morning. The second recency was the June war against Iran, which was actually a well-executed conflict from the United States perspective with Israel because it was tight. It went against the military installations only. It did not expand the war. It lasted over only 12 days. But remember, in that conflict, Iran did not respond. Its proxies in Hezbollah and the Shia militia groups in southern Iraq and the Houthis did not respond either, and they did not close the Strait of Hormuz. So there was a recency bias that led to this false sense of confidence and a terrible reading of intelligence leading to a horrible decision to go to war. That, though, I think the reason I believe that it's what you described as sort of pulling America even further back from military adventurism, the war is very unpopular. And it's not only unpopular among Democrats, it's unpopular across the United States. They know that this ended with basically a humiliating end for the United States, some kind of sort of surrender by the US of the war goals of regime change or nuclear. None of those were achieved. And so I think there's a fatigue, even among Republicans, except for some of the true neoconservative hawks. But in most of the United States political system, there is unanimous opinion or near unanimous, that this was a mistake and it did not go well, and will think twice or three times before they do something again.
Amos, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you lending your perspective. Amos Hochstein with us, former White House senior advisor and managing partner at TWG Global.